All right, welcome to the deep dive. You guys have sent in some really interesting stuff for us to dig into, and today we're looking at excerpts from The CEO Whisperer by Manfred F. Kets de Vries.
Yeah.
And think of this deep dive as like, I don't know, like a cheat sheet, but for some pretty powerful concepts about like what makes us tick, both for ourselves and for the people the people around us.
Right.
And so I think our mission today is to pull out like the most crucial insights about human behavior.
Okay.
Especially, how it all works when we lead, how we work, and how we grow as people.
I like that.
So I know we're going to uncover like some surprising reasons for why we do things.
Yeah.
And all these dynamics that are going on in our relationships.
I think what's so compelling about this material, and I know you've read it, is just how deeply it really probes, It's not just like scratching the surface about why we do what we do, but Kets de Vries really taps into some fundamental psychological principles that often, operate beneath our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
So it's almost a reminder that understanding ourselves and others, it's like peeling back layers.
It is, yeah. Like, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So let's just dive in. I mean, one of the first things that kind of grabbed me from what you sent was like this whole idea that what's being said isn't always like what's really going on.
Right.
And the author opens with this really striking statement. He says, "Sometimes the loudest cries for help are silent."
Wow.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, right?
It does.
About how much could be happening under the surface in any interaction.
Absolutely.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah. And what's so particularly relevant to, the folks listening to this deep dive is how these unspoken dynamics play out in organizations.
Right. So, the text actually talks about these subtle psychological forces, and they can even undermine like the most logical strategies.
Oh, for sure.
So have you ever felt like you're on a team or like you're part of a company and it's just stuck in a rut? Even when the plans on paper look, completely solid, this could be a classic example of those unconscious forces at work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That rings so true. And then he brings up, the classic Freud iceberg analogy.
Yeah.
Where the idea is that all of our like conscious thoughts, that's just the tip.
Right.
And then there's this massive psychic structure that lies underneath.
Exactly.
It's kind of a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's humbling and a little bit scary.
A little scary, yeah. That so much of what's like motivating us is happening outside of our direct control.
Right.
Almost making us, as the book says, strangers to ourselves.
Absolutely. Think about those times, and we all have them, where you've just like reacted so strongly to something, but you don't even understand why you've reacted that way.
Yeah.
That could just be a tiny little glimpse into the power of your unconscious.
Right.
And then, connected to that is this concept of repetition compulsion. It's a very curious human tendency to just repeat the same patterns,
right,
even if they lead to negative outcomes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, why do you think we do that? Why do you think we find ourselves sometimes in these similar frustrating situations again and again and again?
Well, it's almost like we're trying to, resolve something unresolved from the past.
Yeah.
Even if like the present situation doesn't quite fit that, it's like we're trying to jam a square peg in a round hole. And the book also makes a really great point that, a lot of leaders tend to focus on just the purely rational aspects of business, like the rational structural point of view and this idea of the economic man, that everyone is driven purely by logic and self-interest.
Right.
But, maybe they're missing like a huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to, really understanding and motivating their teams.
They're missing a big piece. So I'm curious for you, considering all of your leadership experience, like how often do you factor in these less rational, more emotional undercurrents when you're trying to understand team dynamics or individual performance?
Yeah. Because,
to ignore those unconscious drivers would be like trying to fix a car engine without looking under the hood.
Yeah, that's a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's go to something that feels a little bit more intuitive.
Yeah.
The power of storytelling.
Okay. I like it.
The book argues that sharing life situations, those resonate far more deeply than just like being lectured or given instructions.
Right.
It highlights how we connect when we realize that we're not the only ones with problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is no human action that isn't recognized by other people.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that sense of like relief when someone shares a similar struggle that you've had?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it makes you feel, I don't know, less alone.
Less alone, and like it validates what you're going through, right?
It's exactly.
What's really fascinating about that for, for all of us is like the neurological basis for why stories are so impactful.
Right.
Listening to narratives, it's not passive. Like it actually lights up specific areas of our brain.
Oh, wow.
And the text mentions this thing called the mirror neuron system.
Uh-huh.
So think about this. When you see someone, laughing or crying, you might feel a little tug of that emotion yourself, like you feel it too.
Yep.
And that's your mirror neurons at work.
Oh, wow.
They're allowing you to almost experience what that other person is feeling, which is, so crucial for empathy and understanding.
It is. It's like our brains are wired for connection through stories.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And the book goes so far as to even describe dramatic stories as being like neurological microsurgery.
Wow.
They have this incredible ability to foster empathy and even cooperation.
Right.
And it makes total sense when you think about how a compelling story can completely shift your perspective or, create this strong sense of shared experience.
That's true.
Right. And, even a practical application of this is this life case study approach that's used in executive coaching.
Right.
By sharing their own challenges as stories, leaders then realize they're not isolated.
Yeah.
And the collective wisdom of the group, then can lead to breakthroughs.
Uh-huh.
This sense of shared experience then acts as a powerful catalyst for change.
I like that.
Right. So even in your own interactions, how often do you leverage storytelling, to connect with others or to illustrate a point?
That is a great question. I'm gonna have to think about that one.
Yeah, I think it's something for all of us to consider.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, moving on, let's talk about, something that we all face in life, which is navigating setbacks.
Yeah, everybody has them.
The author shares their own experience about being turned down for a job at Harvard.
Okay.
And, how that seemingly negative event actually fueled their ambition.
Right.
It really does highlight that how you deal with failure is what shows true character.
Oh, for sure.
Can you think of a time where, looking back, a setback actually proved to be a turning point for you?
I think all of us can. I think if you really took some time to think about it, that's such a crucial perspective to consider, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get bogged down by disappointment. But as the book suggests, our response to those moments, that's what truly defines us.
Right.
So how you respond to those setbacks, that's what matters. And then the text brings up this other idea of existential anxiety.
Uh-huh.
This feeling of questioning life's meaning. And, that can become more prominent as we age. So I'm just curious, have you ever found yourself pondering those bigger questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just part of being human, right?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a universal human experience. And what's so interesting about this is how the book frames this anxiety.
Yeah.
It doesn't just see it as a negative. It suggests that it can also be a motivator to find new meaning, to really, be in the present moment.
Right.
It's almost like that discomfort can actually push us towards something more fulfilling.
It can. Yeah.
Right. Like that discomfort can be a signal that maybe it's time to kind of reevaluate and perhaps realign with what truly matters to us. And then the book, also talks about immortality systems. These are ways we as humans cope with the awareness of our own mortality.
Right.
And that includes our connection to the natural world. This Gaia concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
It suggests that our desire to feel part of something larger can help us deal with, that fundamental anxiety.
It's a broad perspective.
Yeah.
But it makes sense that, feeling connected to something enduring can provide a sense of, comfort and meaning that goes beyond our, individual lifespan.
Right.
So let's talk about something a little more exciting. Let's talk about those aha moments.
Okay.
Those sudden flashes of insight that can lead to, some really significant breakthroughs in understanding.
Yes.
The book describes them as sudden manifestations of essence or meaning.
I like that.
So have you ever experienced one of those moments where you've been wrestling with a problem and then suddenly it just clicks?
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
Yeah.
And, neuroscientifically, these moments are just so fascinating.
Right.
The right hemisphere of our brain, which is more attuned to novel situations and holistic thinking, that plays a key role.
Yeah.
And then the amygdala, which is involved in processing emotions and signaling importance, that also gets activated.
Oh, wow.
And it helps to solidify these new insights into our long-term memory.
Wow.
So it's not just a mental feeling, but there's real rewiring happening in our brains.
That's incredible. So it's more than just a thought. It's like a neurological event.
It is.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the book even mentions regression in the service of the ego.
Okay.
It's where these seemingly random memories just like pop up, and then all of a sudden you just like understand their significance in relation to a current challenge. It's like your brain was subconsciously piecing things together in the background.
Like it's working while you're not even paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So think of it like your mind is doing background processing, and suddenly all the pieces just like fall into place. And, this whole anecdote about Michelangelo seeing the angel in the marble, that beautifully illustrates this idea of incubation and unconscious processing in creative breakthroughs.
Right.
It suggests that sometimes the best way to actually find a solution is to just step away from the problem and let your mind work on it in the background.
But, I mean, the book also wisely points out that chance favors the prepared mind.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these moments of insight, they don't just, magically appear, right?
Right.
They often follow a period of, focused effort and immersion in the problem.
Right.
So, it's a good reminder that you need to put in the groundwork, even if that breakthrough, feels sudden.
Absolutely. That's critical for you to remember, in your own problem-solving processes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let's kind of dig into, how we understand each other through the lens of transference and attachment. Okay. So the book introduces transference as the way that our past relationship patterns, they unconsciously influence our current interactions.
Right.
And I love this quote. It says, "It dominates the whole of each person's relations to his human environment."
Wow.
Powerful, right? So have you ever noticed yourself reacting to someone based more on past experiences with others than on the actual present situation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely, yeah. I mean, it's like we have all these old scripts running in the background that can kind of color our perception of new people and situations.
They do. And, attachment theory provides such a great framework for understanding how those scripts actually develop.
Right.
Our early relationships, especially with our caregivers, those shape our fundamental approach to, forming and maintaining relationships throughout our entire lives.
That's true.
Isn't that amazing? And, the book briefly mentions different attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant.
Yeah.
And, just understanding your own attachment patterns, that can provide really valuable insight into your inner world and how you relate to others.
Right.
Yeah, it's a really powerful lens
It is
for understanding our own relationship tendencies, and also for having more empathy for how other people approach connection. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the book also offers some really, really important cautions about, the dangers of extremes. It touches on the Icarus syndrome, this excessive confidence that can lead to a downfall.
Yeah.
It even mentions some red flags, unrealistic self-belief.
Yeah.
And, creating a no bad news culture. Have you ever seen that play out in a team or an organization?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It could be, I don't know, it could be disastrous, really.
It can.
Yeah.
It's a pattern that unfortunately repeats itself.
Yeah.
When hubris takes over and feedback is stifled, it can set the stage for some pretty significant failures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the book also, discusses the false self, that kind of protective facade we might present to the world, which can prevent us from, truly connecting with others and feeling genuinely alive.
Yeah.
We project our true self.
So it's almost like we're playing a role
Yes.
instead of just being ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then there's, the issue of greed, which the book suggests is often rooted in an inner feeling of lack, not just a desire for material wealth,
Right.
It can drive some really destructive behavior.
It can. And what's so insightful for you here is to consider greed not just as a financial issue,
Right.
but as a potential symptom of a deeper emotional void.
Yeah.
And that understanding, I think, can help you approach the situations that involve excessive ambition or, acquisition with a little bit more nuance.
Right.
The book also, briefly touches on the rise of negative identity in society, where people bond primarily through opposition and distrust.
Yeah, that feels very relevant to a lot of the social and political dynamics that we see today.
It does. It does. And, it highlights how these feelings of like powerlessness, they can fuel this,
Right.
and how leaders, can sometimes exploit those fears,
Right.
leading to like more and more division.
Uh-huh.
It's a stark reminder of the dangers of focusing solely on what we're against rather than, what we're for.
That's a good point, yeah.
And that, leads us into this whole discussion of balance. And, the book draws on Tenney's concepts of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft,
Okay.
Community versus society.
Perfect.
So Gemeinschaft, think of like a tight-knit village where there's strong social cohesion and mutual support.
Uh-huh.
But then Gesellschaft, that's more like a modern individualistic society.
Right.
And so, the book discusses this shift towards Gesellschaft and, some of its potential downsides, like feelings of emptiness and disconnection. Does that resonate with your observations of society today?
It does, yeah. I mean, while there are benefits, obviously, to like individual freedom and opportunity,
Right.
There also can be a sense of isolation in those highly individualistic societies.
There can. And, even the book points out how social media, despite its promise of connection,
Right.
it can sometimes exacerbate these feelings of detachment.
It's true, yeah.
That's a crucial point to consider in our increasingly, digital world.
It is.
These superficial online interactions, they might not actually provide that deep sense of belonging that we all crave.
No, I don't.
And, that can contribute to what the book calls a culture of narcissism.
Right.
Characterized by like grandiosity,
Right.
a lack of empathy,
Uh-huh.
and even in some extreme cases, psychopathic traits.
Yeah.
Kind of scary
It is.
to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And then the book also briefly mentions cult-like organizations,
Right.
that try to exert total control over their members, stifling individuality.
Right.
That's highlighting, the dangers of organizational cultures that demand like absolute conformity.
Right.
And those environments, they can stifle creativity, innovation, and just overall well-being of people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, the book touches on, the complexities of wellness and aging.
Yeah.
While acknowledging, the current focus on well-being, it cautions against like just blindly accepting every new trend, right?
It does, and it addresses that, the often avoided topic of aging and mortality.
Yeah.
And, what's important for you to consider is to approach all of this wellness information with a critical eye.
Right.
And the book also brings up Erickson's final stage of life.
Okay.
Integrity versus despair.
Right.
And he emphasizes this importance of reflecting on your life with a sense of satisfaction and acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that, those later stages of life, they can be a time for like finding peace and meaning in your journey.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, you can see how these, what seem like diverse ideas from the CEO Whisperer actually weave together to offer a really rich understanding of just human nature.
They do.
So we've explored the hidden power of the unconscious,
Right.
the connective tissue of storytelling,
Uh-huh.
the resilience that we find in navigating setbacks,
Right.
and frameworks that help us to understand ourselves and other people.
Yeah.
And we've also considered like some of the challenges and imbalances in our societies.
Yeah.
And the ongoing journey of, personal growth.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. It's a lot.
Yeah. And these insights, I mean, drawn directly from the material that you shared with us, they provide such a valuable lens, not just for understanding leadership, but I mean, for navigating all of our interactions and our own inner world.
They do.
It makes you wonder, I mean, which of these ideas sparks the most like reflection for you right now?
Yeah.
Maybe considering the unconscious influences in your own decision-making or the stories that have shaped your own perspective.
Right.
This deep dive, this is really just the beginning.
It is.
I mean, there's so much more to explore about what makes us human.
Absolutely.
And I think this has been a great start. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to everyone listening, keep sending in those great sources. We'll keep diving deep.
We will.